The 540 is brought to you by StarCityGames.com weekly sale. This week, you can take 15% off of Commander set singles. So if you love singleton formats like Cube and Commander, like I do, and maybe you listened to our Commander review episode a few weeks ago, you can head over to StarCityGames.com/sale to take 15% off all of those Commander set singles you can find. Now, this only lasts until May 17th at 10:59 a.m., so make sure you hurry over to StarCityGames.com/sale so you can command and conquer. The 540 is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel and Design. If you want to get the coolest Magic t-shirts and hoodies and stickers, go to coalesceapparel.shop, and if you find something you like, use gift code SCG to save 10% off at checkout. That's coalesceapparel.shop. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, you know, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more, before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Welcome back, everyone, to the 540, and we are gearing up for some drafting today, but not your normal kind of drafting, unless you have been living in a pandemic for the last 14 months. Anyway, I am one of your hosts, Justin Parnell. You can find me at jparnell1 on Twitter, and of course, my significantly smarter co-host, which is why he's here,
Ryan Overturf. You can find me at Ryan Overdrive on Twitter. Don't sell yourself short, Justin. You can't get to 540 without two 270s.
That's true. That's true. Is that good, two 270s? It's good enough, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that you lose a lot with just one 540. And really, something we talk about a lot on the podcast, I really like high synergy environments. You got two 270s that play well together, that's worth a lot more than 540.
That's a good point. That is a very good point. So, speaking of numbers of cards, as we often do, because the podcast name is called 540, we're going to be talking about ways to draft your cube with two people, and none of those involve needing 540 cards.
No, you usually use quite a bit fewer for this sort of thing.
Yes. Now, last week, we were talking, well, Ryan primarily was talking, I was asking questions, about Tuberts, which is a 180 card two-player cube.
2 to 4 player cube, but yes, that is the gist. Mostly I have been doing two-player drafts. I actually got a handful of two-player drafts in yesterday, interspersed between some 8-player drafts. You know, now that the local gamers have had our vaccines marinate, it was quite a blast.
Yeah, I very much look forward to that. Hopefully, by the time the next episode comes out, I will have a similar story.
Nice,
but we can only hope. Yeah, so two to 4 players. But today we are only talking about drafts or play environments you can do with exactly 2 people. You don't need more than that. And in a lot of cases, you don't want more than that because these are formats designed for 2 people.
Yeah, exactly. Once you get to 4, you just do booster packs with different numbers. 3, we mentioned last week. That one's tough. You can't necessarily make that one work. But talking about 2-player drafts this week, and we'll start things off with the drafting style that I have adopted for the Tubert model. And this was something that I kind of mocked up, draw some inspiration from some different places. The idea really of the whole 180 card cube model, and then of using this way to draft, is to try to emulate the drafting and gameplay of an 8-player draft to the extent that is possible. That means tense drafting decisions, feeling like you're drafting against another player, some hidden information, some strategy in trying to wheel things, and then gameplay with 2 pretty coherent, reasonable decks. Draft format I came up with, I call this Minneapolis Draft because I do not have the necessary hubris to call it Overturf Draft.
Okay. What has anyone wanted to name it? Has anyone that's not you wanted to name it after you?
I very much doubt it. If they do, they haven't expressed as much to me.
Okay. I think it's okay if other people organically start calling it that, but you definitely can't take it upon yourself to call it that.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing where if you just draft for a while and you don't have a name and one of your friends is like, hey, we should name it after you. You came up with it. You're really smart and handsome. But you can't just show up and be like, hey, I named this thing after me because I'm really cool.
Yeah, and then they all, everyone lifts you on their shoulders and they're saying, Overturf Draft, and you're like, only 2 of us can play this, even though there's 5 of us here.
Exactly. But the way it works, both players will start with 8 7-card packs. And what you do, both players will simultaneously, 1 pack at a time, look at a 7-card pack. You get 1 first pick, and then you trade packs with each other. Then from the pack you were passed, you take 2 more picks, pass back 1 more time, so there's 4 cards left over in each pack. Take 2 more, the remaining 2 cards in each pack go in the leftovers. Repeat this 7 more times until you've drafted all 8 packs on both sides.
Okay. So that leaves you with 54 cards?
So you're getting 3 cards from every pack.
Are you getting 3 cards from every pack? I thought you're getting,
sorry, you're getting 5. You're getting 5.
5.
Yeah.
Okay.
3 from your own, 2 from the other. Yeah. So,
okay, so you're getting 40.
Yes.
Okay.
You're seeing a few more.
Yes.
There's some cards that are intentionally not going to show up in the draft, so you get a little bit more agency about the power level of your deck. But yeah, you tend to have exactly enough cards left over for your life total abacus.
Okay. All right. That's good. That's really important. So why don't you tell people what you mean? Because I would say I've probably used cards to count my life total in cube drafts only more than I have done pen and paper or any other method.
Yeah, it's the only way I do it. So what the magic life total abacus is, you take the cards in your sideboard. I guess they could be like basic lands from the cube too, or just cards. And if you have them,
it has to be sideboard.
Yeah,
I'm gonna make a call. I'm gonna make a call right now.
Sure. Try
or undrafteds.
Try your damnedest to make it your sideboard.
Yeah,
because then it's also just right there. Yeah. And any card you put facing vertically represents 5 life points. So you start with 3 of those vertically, you start with 5 horizontally. Horizontal cards on top of the vertical cards, those are all worth 1 life point. And as your life total changes, you add or remove cards so that you have the requisite number of 5s facing vertically and then enough 1s facing horizontally to show your life total.
And this is great because obviously it feels good to take large chunks out of your opponent's life total because it's physically represented by a mass of cards. So it looks really nice when you just get a good swing in and they just got to take off like 2 from the top and like 3 from the bottom. And they're not left with much. That's the main reason that you want to do this, other than ease, of course.
Couple nice shortcuts. If you ever take 4 damage, you just take one of your 5s and turn it sideways. That's -4 on the abacus. That's a really easy one. Also, now that you've heard this out loud, if someone asks your life total in a cube draft, you no longer have an excuse to say, I don't know. Quit being that sloppy moron. Keep track of your life total.
Don't be sloppy. Yeah, I think this is the... I can't believe it's taken us whatever episode this is to talk about this, because I'm like so strongly in favor of this method of life total keeping for cube. It's ridiculous.
It's the sort of thing where as soon as you see it, you're like, oh, wow, that just makes sense.
Game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So ultimately you are drafting 112 cards for the Minneapolis Draft.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever done this with regular booster packs before?
I have not. So I implemented this with the 180 card model, and it's just played so much better than any larger cube for 2-player drafts that I haven't really had any interest in trying to do it with larger cubes.
Okay. Fair enough.
We did initially start with 7 9-card packs, but this might not be a problem to some listeners, but it removes a lot of the excitement, interesting decisions, and tension for me. But when we did 7 9-card packs, we just had too many playables.
Yeah, I could see that. Because, well, especially with the design of the Tubert is such that you are going to naturally have more playables. So,
exactly.
Yeah. I could see if you wanted to do this draft, and this is actually a really great time to bring this up. All of the formats we're going to be talking about today, these are kind of our suggested ways to draft them numbers-wise, not like the way to do it, but numbers-wise. And if you are drafting a different environment, like if you wanted to do the Minneapolis Draft, but you wanted to do it out of a 360-card cube, 540-card cube, you probably do want to add more cards just because you want to have less, cards that end up being forced into your draft pool that are useless.
Yep, and here's a nice thing you can do. This is something that I've suggested to people that in the course of talking about the Tubert model, they've asked questions about the drafting style, questions about number of playables, this, that, and the other thing. And what I suggest, and this is a casual format, so you have the power to do this, do what you can to make it fun for you. And start with a minimum, if you want to try this with a bigger cube, start with your 7/8. And if you just say, hey, I'm not really happy with my deck, can we just make a couple more packs? And just do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. Especially because a lot of people, most people that are going to be listening to this, that either have a cube or has a friend that has a cube, or probably don't have 180 card cubes.
Right.
So it's likely you're going to end up with a situation where you don't have a refined experience like the Tubert, and you probably do want to add on a little bit. But as Ryan and I were actually talking about prior to, hitting the record button, we both prefer having less cards rather than more cards.
Mm-hmm.
Makes a lot more tension in the draft. It requires more decision making. And part of a draft is not getting everything you want. Is you have to make decisions to say, I value this over this, and I may not get this back.
It is way more interesting to me to draft in a way where you're shooting for your 23 playables. You may go a little over. Sometimes you fall a little bit short, but as long as you're getting close to that number with the model you're using to draft, I like that there's some situations where even with the most powerful cards, you're still taking a hedge when you draft them. It's like you take something and this is clearly the most powerful card in the pack, but there's a chance I won't be able to make it work in my deck. I think that that's actually a really interesting part of drafting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really like that in particular for this, it's like, this is essentially like a 2-person snake draft. You're taking one and then you're passing and then they're taking a pick and then they're taking the wheel pick and then so on and so on. And there are probably a lot of situations where you are going to be in better shape being able to pick the second and third best card out of the pack, and I'm putting best in air quotes, rather than picking the first. And there's a lot of tension there because you, as the opener of the pack, you have the agency to kind of affect what you are drafting, knowing your opponent is going to take 2 cards where you're only taking 1. They're doing the same thing, so that's a draw to me for this format.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I really like about this drafting style is the fact that the second and third pick after you get past the pack is arguably the better position drafting the pack, because it's something we floated and talked about was letting the player who opens the pack take the first two picks, but that removes a lot of tension, and getting the first pick is already so good. Yeah. And that's where the hidden information comes in the draft too, and putting it too lopsided in that direction just makes it a lot less engaging. But making it so your first pick is some combination of trying to find the best card, but also determining the best combination of two cards that'll come back. Yes. And how all these things work together has been really fun for me.
Yeah. And another note too of why I really like the pack opener picks one, then passes it, and they pick second and third, is it puts a lot less emphasis on did you open a good pack.
Yes.
Because if you can just grab the two best cards out of that pack, there's a big difference between the second best card in the pack and the fourth best card in the pack, and it turns that from the opener is going to get the first and fourth, but the person you're passing to is going to get the next two cards. Because usually the top three, I feel like in a lot of packs, that's kind of like where the line is drawn of like, these are the top tier of cards, at least in the beginning of the draft, until you start, identifying like, I want to specifically look for this. And obviously when you're going with 8 packs down the line, as you get deeper into the draft, I imagine you will start to get things that your opponent is probably not focusing on as much, unless it is a cube that has less colors, which I think would probably also be quite interesting.
And I really like what the 1 first pick, 2 second picks model does for signaling, because with the color distribution, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, really however you want to design it, because you can do whatever you want with your cube, but determining, okay, I'm taking this card, these cards are left over. Well, if the card that I took plays best with only one other on-color card in the pack, might not be the best pick. Because if the cards you want to play together don't come back, you got to spend a lot of time thinking about that, and the signaling does become very important.
Yeah, definitely. And I love what you had said a moment ago, is there's a little bit of hidden information, and each person's going to have 8 cards that the other person will not know about until you play.
Yes, and they will generally be the most impactful cards in their deck.
Yes, yes. Which is a lot of fun, and that makes for a lot of great moments. And I think that's a really important thing. It's so crazy because like Cube in general, I think is a format that, in my opinion, is if you have a group of people, like 6 or 8 people, and you guys can just cube for the afternoon, I think that is like the most fun you can have playing Magic, more so than a 2-person draft, even though I'm not dogging 2-person drafts. I absolutely love them, which is why we're doing this entire podcast on them. But the special thing about doing a 2-person draft is when you have those moments, that's like a shared experience with like a single person. And I don't know, that really creates like, it's the most important part of Magic, as we've found out over the last year and some, is being able to have those kind of moments. And these type draft formats where unexpected things happen that you're not, if I'm playing Ryan and he opens, I've seen most of his deck, I kind of know what he's doing, and then he plays like Time Vault that I did not see, and it was like his very first pick out of his pack, and we have a great match after that. That's something that you're going to remember, and I always think that that's something that is really special to me with like two-player draft formats.
Yeah, I did a 2-player Grixis Cube draft yesterday, and I had no idea what my friend's win condition was. He started casting rituals, and he's playing this Storm deck, and he played Dark Ritual, Seething Song, Yawgmoth's Will, Jessica's Will, and his Storm count was really getting up there. And I'm like, I do not know what happens next.
Yeah, you're just like sweating bullets over here, like, oh god.
He ended up Ignite Memorizing me for 13, which was outrageous.
Oh my god. You have to... I wonder what the ratio is to not die from 20.
It was really tough because my hand had a 4-mana card in Turnabout and a 6-mana card in Time Spiral, so it actually only took 4 copies to kill me.
I was gonna say, I was like, you really need to be gripping some lands in those situations to even have a shot.
Yeah, I had a land and I think like 2 1-drops. I was hoping for a sweat. I did not even get a sweat.
4. Yeah, I would have made you keep going. I just was like, I just want to know. I just want to know what I would have killed you from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
so,
there's another thing with the hidden information too. He wanted to keep going because he only got to see 3 cards from my hand.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, he hit 2 time spirals, and it's like, all right. I want to see what else is in there. That's a good point. That's a good point. Okay, so when you're drafting this, because I've never drafted this format, what would you say is like a strategy that you were looking for?
I would say that at the start of the draft and while you're going early, I would err on the side of just taking the most powerful card and seeing what comes back. And then as you get sent these signals, what's being sent to you second and third, what's coming back from the packs you open, you start to get a feel for the sort of stuff that's going to wheel. And at the back end of the draft, once you have like an idea what your opponent's up to, that's when you start taking the card that you think your opponent wants first and trying to wheel 2 good ones every time.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that. Man, I bet that's quite interesting if 2 people have that same mindset.
Yes.
Oh man. Okay. That's good. All right. So that's Minneapolis Draft as it is known. But it's not Overturf Draft unless people are just taken by this episode and they're like, we want to change it to Overturf Draft.
So in the event that never happens, because it won't, just continue calling it Minneapolis Draft, and that should be the name.
All right, we'll talk at Minneapolis Draft. All right, anything else on Minneapolis Draft before we take our first break here?
That's the long and short of it. I did a little bit of a write-up that's just the rules side of it in my original 2-player cube draft article, the proper way to do 2-player cube drafts. So the text writing can be there if you ever need to reference that.
Everything I know about 2-player draft format.
Everything I know about the cube I designed myself.
It's great. I wonder if that's going to be the title of this episode. Everything we know about 2-player draft formats.
Perfect.
Maybe we should submit that and see what Cedric thinks.
Yeah, he'll love it. It's actually the ideologically perfect title.
It truly is here. All right. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and come back and get into more drafts. Have some extra cards laying around that you want to get rid of? Go to starcitygames.com/sell. It has never been easier to turn your cards into cash, or if you're looking to outfit your cube or commander deck with some new favorites, get a 30% trade-in bonus when you choose store credit. No matter what your collection looks like, we have a method for you. Want to see exactly what every card you have is worth? Check out our buy list. Don't have time for that? Stick it all in a box. Send it to us, and we'll make you an offer with our ship and sell program. Or if you want a more personal touch, make your way to the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia to sit down with a buyer just like the old days. With the fastest turnaround time in the industry, get an offer in under 4 days when you go to starcitygames.com/sell. Selling has never been easier. Okay, for the next few segments, we're going to do 2 draft formats each. So I guess we'll start with what is probably one of the most popular draft formats, even though it's maybe not one of the oldest, but one of the most popular 2-man draft formats, and that is grid drafting.
Yeah, I have done a ton of grid drafts. I'm working on catching up in numbers with number of Minneapolis drafts I've done, but I'm working against years of time spent grid drafting.
Yeah, I totally understand. Okay, so I realized, for each of these drafts, like in our show notes, I realized I've put down like the number of cards to tell people to use, but I realized with grid drafting, I put down a number of what I use, but I've also noticed that grid drafting is the most different from the total numbers for kind of what is like commonly accepted.
Yeah, we talked a little bit during the intro. I like a tight draft experience, smaller number of cards, smaller packs for 2-player drafts. I really like the 3x3 grid. I've seen 4x4, I've seen 5x5. You might go totally berserk. I don't know. Maybe somebody's doing a 9x9 grid. Maybe you have your whole cube laid out and you do rows and columns that way.
Rotisserie grid draft?
Yeah, I would do a rotisserie grid draft. That actually sounds kind of fun.
Yeah, that would be nuts. It'd be nuts if you truly shuffle it up. Man, what would his decks look like? Okay, so a grid draft. I'm going to talk about, as Ryan said, you can expand upon this in any way that if you are cubing a number appropriately. So the way that I also like to do it is 3x3. So you simply take a number of cards. In my opinion, the number I like to use is 5 packs of a 9. You don't really have to separate them out into packs, so you just grab 135 cards. So 5 packs of 9, shuffle them up, and then you're going to lay the top 9 cards out into a 3x3 grid. And then in an alternating fashion, so one person goes first, one person that goes second, then on the next pack, the person that went second will go first, and the person that went first will go second, etc., etc. You will take a row or a column. So the first person that is picking is always going to get 3 cards, and the second person that is picking can either get 2 cards if they are taking from a row or a column that has already had a card taken by the first player, or 3 cards if they are taking a row or a column that has not been interacted with by the first player. That's going to leave either 3 or 4 cards left over, and those cards are set to the side and removed from the draft. And then you do this, like I said, for what I generally do, 15 times until you have drafted the entire pack or set of 135 cards.
And when it comes to drafting rows and columns, a very common meme amongst my friends, we will ask at least several times a draft if we can go diagonal. No, you cannot go diagonal. You still cannot go diagonal.
Yeah. No, rows, columns, that is it. And rest assured, you will want to go diagonal the very first pack. That's just how it works. I don't know how, it's crazy, but that is just how it works.
Yeah, so, it's a really fun way to draft because you're drafting groups of cards, both in a way to try to maximize the synergies and the playables that you're picking up, and also not leaving something comparably good or better on the table if you can avoid it.
Mm-hmm. I love that it's so many packs, because ultimately it's 15 packs that you're looking at collectively, like as a pair of 2 people. And at first, you are generally wanting to draft the best cards available. But then as the draft goes, you start to say, can I draft a card that I want and also grab a card I do not want, but my opponent wants? Mm-hmm. Is that worth it? Or do I take this card and then a card that is like a playable for me, but maybe not a card that I want? So the kind of the very aggressive hate drafting at some point will show its head, no matter what. No matter your experience in the draft, I would say in most cases, that's something that you will, at some point, you will stop and consider, because you will not be playing blue, and a Jace the Mind Sculptor will pop up alongside in a row or a column of a card that you want, and you're like, do I want to let them have that Jace? I just want this Lightning Bolt, but I could get Lightning Bolt and something, Hazoret the Fervent. But do I want to let them have this Jace? Maybe I draft this Jace, this card that neither of us want, and then this Lightning Bolt in a column.
Yeah, and it is really interesting, too, because with the 2-player draft format, hate drafting takes on a totally different texture.
Yeah.
I am generally a pretty big detractor from hate drafting because, especially in cube draft, we tend to play 4v4s and assign teams after. So to the extent that you're even cutting a card from somebody, it might be your teammate. It's just a pretty stupid thing to do.
It's never worth it, when you do
no
that.
guarantee you're playing against who you're cutting it from. If there's something you might be playing in that pack, then there is clear value there you're missing out on for dubious value that you're cutting from somebody else. But when you have one opponent and you're looking them in the eyes, it can be very good strategically and very satisfying personally to just take the card that they want out from under them.
Absolutely. And in these draft formats, and we're going to talk about a few draft formats where all of the information is available to all players, and this is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
With a grid draft, unlike the Minneapolis draft, you can see every single card that is being picked. So,
and then in your example too, if you scoop up a Jace the Mind Sculptor that your opponent wants, it's not that difficult to imagine finding a way to cast it.
Oh no, I would definitely try to cast it. Especially in those drafts. In cubes that I make, I got a lot of lands, and I know you're the same. So I'm gonna figure out a way to cast that Jace. But
yeah,
you know, I'm thinking like it's the last 3 packs, and you're like, I don't have any blue fixing.
Yeah,
it starts to
you just draft it and then put it right back in the box.
Yep. Oh yeah, I put it. So oftentimes, because there's such a mental game going on with all of these drafts, which I just love. I will sometimes, in these open drafts, I will start, like, as I draft, I will separate into cards I'm going to play and cards I'm not. And if I hate draft a good card that I know, like, my opponent really wants, I will, like, openly, like, separate it into, like, the piles of the cards that I have no intention of playing.
Just a really loud flick as you drop it on the table.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, make a comment, just be like, well, this goes over here in the trash. No one wants this.
Shame about that, Jace.
Yeah, could have been a contender, but so with grid drafting, like we were saying, 3x3 is the most common, in my opinion, and I think it's probably the most common by a lot. You can go bigger, but I really prefer to make those decisions more meaningful, which means less cards and a smaller grid.
Yep, same.
Yeah. You might like this format if you've not done it. If you like kind of the openness, like if you don't want there to be any hidden information, because sometimes hidden information can be intimidating for people that are not experienced in drafting, especially if there's now this is really the case with all of these draft formats, but if there's a gap between an experienced player and maybe a less experienced player, the hidden information appears to create a bigger gap than to the less experienced player. In my opinion, the open draftings actually create a bigger gap. But
yeah, I was actually going to say Grid Draft does a great job of threading the needle between two complexities, where you have this open information, and even if trying to do a Rochester draft is just not in your range, or Rochester, the face-up, like 15 card packs, like there's just so much going on between players and such deep strategic complexity in how you manage that. This is something that is all open-facing information, so that can help you a little bit, so you really see what other players are valuing. You can learn things that way. And then also you're drafting in a way where face-up piles can be really complex, but there's not that much going on, so you can kind of understand it on that level. So this is one that I found that most players at least really like the first time they try grid drafting. Yes.
This is a very enticing draft to do, because when you first do it, your first draft, it's fun, but it's difficult to do a good job of drafting unless you're drafting against someone that also has not done it ever. And that is just because it's like it can be a little difficult to wrap your head around at first, but like after you've done it that first time, you will be thinking constantly of like, what could I have gone back and like how could I have like drafted these differently, and more in a way that you would in a normal draft, because of this wealth of open information, because everything is open. So you can see every single decision you made and how that was affected 100% of the time.
Yep.
Ryan, do you have any particular strategy you like to kind of enforce here in a grid draft?
So I value two things very highly in grid draft, and they both cascade from what I believe is the most fundamentally true thing about grid draft, is most decks are going to be 3 or more color soup. Like, you're just going to play a deck that cares about value. It's kind of unavoidable with this drafting style, especially with all the face-up hate drafting going on. And because I believe this is where we're going to end up, no matter how we do it, that leads me to value high power level outliers. You know, you mentioned Jace the Mind Sculptor. That's exactly the kind of card I'm looking for. Signets, just boring value ramp stuff, mana and stuff decks, and then also I would value lands very highly so that whatever power outlier shows up, I'm able to draft it and play with it.
Yep. That is very similar to mine. Mine is I am always looking for a land and thing row. I want to get a good fixing land and a card that is a high percentage to make my deck. And that could mean, it often means boring stuff, right? Like it means like, not like super high powered cards, although those are ones that, because of wanting to specifically draft lands, you want to make sure you're open to those as they come, because you can, like the example we gave later, you can turn that hate draft into a part of your deck a lot easier if you are focusing on the lands. So being able to, when 2 lands come up in the same row, that's a premium row or column. Absolutely.
Yes.
Especially, and this is regardless of kind of the size of the cube. Just because the size of the cube is somewhat irrelevant to the amount of times that lands make your deck, because they're going to make your deck a higher percentage, a higher clip of the time than pretty much any other card. So those are very valuable things to draft. And I imagine this is going to be a similar. We're going to probably bring this type of strategy up probably more often as we go forward. But.
Yeah, as we get into more formats, you should probably just keep that general principle in mind.
Yes. So for grid drafting, you can do this with any sized cube. I don't think there's really there's not really a limit. I would keep in mind the bigger your cube is, sometimes the more you get these just general good stuff medium decks, but like Ryan said, that's kind of an inevitability anyway, so I don't think it matters too much what the size of your cube is. Yeah,
I wouldn't sweat that too much, because you're not going to veer too far away with this drafting style.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on grid drafting before we go to the next one?
That's the long and short of it. Mana and stuff. It's fine to hate your friends.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of which, this might be the draft format where hating your friends is the most built in entirely to the draft format, and that is Solomon Draft. Now, Solomon Draft, this is not the only name that this draft goes by. Solomon Draft also can be known as Factor Fiction Draft, because the entirety of the draft is splitting 5-card Factor Fiction piles until all of the cards are drafted. So you start with 2 45-card stacks, and you alternate taking 5 cards from the top of your stack, revealing them. Your opponent will split them into 2 piles. You will choose the pile that you want, and then your opponent will get the remainder of the cards. And you do this alternating until all of the stacks are gone. Ryan, how do you feel about the card Factor Fiction?
Factor Fiction is simultaneously one of the most brutally powerful card advantage cards ever printed, and most needlessly complex tactical cards ever printed, rolled up into one. It lost a lot of its luster as we entered the Planeswalker age of Magic. Just cards that accrue more and more value over time if they can stay on the battlefield. However, back in the day, and if you are playing a cube that is trying to exclude Planeswalkers, or even in the Planeswalker cubes, Factor Fiction can be backbreaking if you have the right answers remaining in your deck. But the phrase was, EOTFOFYL. End of turn, fact or fiction, you lose.
Yep.
That's the history that this card has. And it's because of its power level and because of its complexity. And for that reason, this draft format is probably the most headache-inducing way to draft a two-player cube that has any level of popularity.
Okay, that's fair. I love Fact or Fiction. It is one of my favorite Magic cards of all time. I feel like I am very good at splitting Fact or Fiction piles, which is a draw to me with this format because I just get to do that over and over. I would say of all of the draft formats, this is the one that I have the highest win percentage in.
The way that I approach drafting, I mentioned previously that I'm a pretty big detractor of hate drafting, and I think that a lot of my strength in draft comes from determining the best lane for me to put something together proactively. And a lot of my skills get left on the bench for Fact or Fiction draft. It's the kind of thing that if I put the refs in, I could probably figure it out. I have not, and I don't want to.
That's fair.
In fact, the time that Fact or Fiction draft tends to come up in my groups is when somebody that's maybe newer to the group or is just getting a little hot-headed is running their mouth. This is the way you put a worse player in their place.
Yes, that is absolutely true. That's a really good way to put it. And I will say, the farther and farther we get away from the year 2001, the more that what Ryan's saying is just the truth. That if you have not like inherently like put significant effort in to like learning this really Magic specific skill, then it's not going to be worth your time and it's not going to matter.
And like Fact or Fiction is this power level outlier from a bygone era, but there's like a huge difference between Jace the Mind Sculptor and Fact or Fiction, where when Jace was legal in Standard and ultimately was banned in Standard, a lot of the conversation was, yo, get ahead, land your Jace, pick a mode at random, you'll be fine. This card is deranged. You got to do your homework for Fact or Fiction.
Yes. A little fun thing that I have done with the Solomon draft is because Fact or Fiction has always been in my cube, and it always will be, just because I absolutely love that card. If you are doing Solomon draft and Fact or Fiction comes up, the person that drafts Fact or Fiction gets to add 5 cards to the draft and perform and basically cast Fact or Fiction. So if you draft it, you can take 5 cards, give them to your opponent, they split them, and you basically just add a card to the pack.
Nice.
It's like a little bonus for drafting Fact or Fiction in the Fact or Fiction draft.
That's a cool rule.
Yeah.
How often do you end up actually doing Solomon drafts?
I don't, honestly, like I think all of the draft that I'm talking about, I think I do pretty evenly. I probably do grid the least.
Okay.
But I think with people that have done less 2-player drafts, they want to do grid the most. But I really like these other ones because I feel like that there's a really like specific like type of way to do the thing, and I think that grid is the most straightforward, and that's not a bad thing. Not at all. But like literally I actually think the last 2-person draft I did was a Solomon draft.
Okay,
well,
right on.
That's not 100% true. The last one I did was one that we're going to talk about later. But the last draft I did with one single other person was a Solomon draft.
Yesterday in the afternoon, we were grilling hamburgers, bratwurst, and drinking mimosas. So I tend to prefer the slightly more simplistic draft formats.
Yeah, mimosas are not Solomon draft encouraging.
Yeah, if you want to do a Solomon draft, you should split the champagne and the orange juice and stick to the orange juice.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. This is it's also if you were looking for a quick don't have to think about it too much, just want to get in and draft between rounds at an event in some sort of like alternate timeline future, Solomon Draft is generally a poor choice because you will be exerting brain power that you might need in the next round of your actual event that you paid money to enter.
Yes.
So I think that is notable. that you might not want to use that brain power for a in between rounds draft.
I absolutely agree. I mean, there's been times where I have personally drafted or been witness to a Solomon Draft where it would get time to build decks, and I would just see the fatigue. It's like, yeah. Do not make me put this together, man.
That's totally fair. That's totally fair. I mean, the strategy here is know how to cast Fact or Fiction and do it, like a million times.
Yes.
That's the strategy. So
yeah, it's a homework lovers format.
Yeah. Yes, it is. That's true. That's true. And honestly, Ryan, I can appreciate that people do not care for it, that it's lower on the rung of 2-player draft formats. I totally get it. I totally do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I actually think it's cool that you have the mental stamina to engage with that kind of thing with any kind of regularity, because that would be tough for me.
Yeah, I just love it. I just love Fact or Fiction. I just love that card so much. I get excited whenever someone casts Fact or Fiction in a game I'm in, multiplayer, single player, whatever it is. I feel like I have more tally marks in the win column of splitting Fact or Fiction, not the game necessarily, but the act of splitting Fact or Fiction that I have in the loss column. So that's something that's like internally important to me.
It's been among the highlights of birding digital cube drafts over the last year when the hero casts a Fact or Fiction and you just watch the opponent slowly move cards back and forth. And it's kind of like The Price is Right, where the audience like, where's that one gonna go?
So my favorite thing about Fact or Fiction, the card, and this format is you generally know how bad you fucked up by the speed in which your opponent selects one of the piles.
Just snap it off. They take the one card they want and then grab the rest and like bonus cards.
Yeah. Didn't need these, but I'll take them. Yeah, it is just like, it's the sub game format, because you're already playing this sub game draft, but then it's like the sub game within the sub game. Yeah. See, those are just the things that I love. Like, honestly, my friend and co-host of Commander versus John Suarez, we both just absolutely love Fact or Fiction. So this is like this is a format we could just go back and forth on. And it's just we both just love it so much. So it's not like, it doesn't feel like work, even though it probably is, but it's work that we've put in already.
A labor of love.
Exactly. I imagine you have you don't have any other notes on Solomon Draft here before we move on.
No, I respect it. I personally enjoy Champagne more than I enjoy Solomon Draft.
You know what? I respect that opinion, Ryan. Okay, all right, we're going to take another break and come back with a couple more draft formats.
Taking a quick break from the podcast to talk to you very quickly about Star City Games Premium and why you should become a Star City Games Premium member. First, me, Cedric Phillips. I'm the online content coordinator for Star City Games. So if you like me and you want to see me keep my job, you should sign up. And if you don't like me, we're not going to talk about that. Okay, let's talk about what you actually get for signing up and paying the $7.99 per month to become a premium member, which is less than the cost of a couple of booster packs, by the way. It's actually, I think, if memory serves, like less than a collector booster, and they got these set boosters and all these different types of boosters now. So look, let's just say for less than a collector booster a month, you receive the following benefits. Are you ready? 5% discount on all Magic the Gathering sealed products, 10% discount on all Magic the Gathering singles, 15% discount on all supplies, which include card sleeves, deck boxes, binders, all that stuff for when real life play gears back up again. You also get some free entry to some SCG Tour Online events if you're digging the SCG Tour Online and want to play in some of those tournaments like our satellites and stuff like that. A couple of freebies out there. But let's not forget the big one, the exclusive access to Star City Games website content from many of Magic the Gathering's top players and fan favorite personalities like myself, like Patrick Sullivan, like Sheldon Menery, like Paulo Vitor Damaderosa, who is way too good at Magic the Gathering, Jerry Thompson, Autumn Burchett, Brian Gottlieb, Todd Anderson, Ari Lax. I'm going to forget somebody here and they're not going to like me for it. Brad Nelson, who's back writing for Star City on a weekly basis. Michael Majors, Dominic Harvey. The list goes on and on and on. That's how I saved myself there for people that I may have forgotten. Ryan Sachs, I didn't forget you. I swear. Ross Merriam, I didn't forget you either. Shaheen, hello. Stop playing bad control decks. Anyway, $7.99 a month. Less than the cost of a collector booster pack. Get awesome content. Discounts 5, 10, 15% across the board. Get access to some SCG Tour online events for free as well. Head over to starcitygames.com/join premium for more information. With that, back to the pod.
All right, so the next draft format we have is actually the first two-player draft format that I ever played.
Same, actually.
Okay. And that is Winston Draft. So Winston Draft, and this has actually been, this is a format I think a lot of people know about because this is one that Wizards of the Coast has actually like put out as like this is a great format to do with booster packs.
Mm-hmm.
So Winston Draft is quite simple. You have a stack of 90 cards, and you take a card from each stack and you lay it face down in 3 piles. So we'll call them pile A, pile B, pile C. The first player will go and look at the face down pile A, and they will either choose to draft that entire pile, which at this point is 1 card, or they will choose to go on to the next pile. If they draft it, they take it, they replace the card without looking at it, their turn is over, their opponent's turn is up. However, if they choose to not draft that pile, they will move on away from that pile, take a face-down card from the top of the stack, put it face down on pile A without looking at it, and then look at pile B. Rinse, repeat for both pile B and pile C. If you get to pile C and you do not want the card or cards in pile C, you will move away from that pile, take a top card from the stack, put it face down on pile C, and then you will take a random card, the top random card of the remaining stack. Now, this continues on, and the stacks, piles A, B, and C, can get as big as people will seemingly allow them to get if they deem those cards undesirable enough to not draft them. Now, this is another draft format. This is the second one after Minneapolis Draft where there is some hidden information.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're frequently going to be drafting piles of cards where your opponent knows most of them, but maybe they don't know the last one. They don't know the last card that was put on there. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes you can get to a pile and you know everything that is in that pile. But otherwise, there's always going to be some amount of hidden information.
This also has a very unique element of hidden information. You know, when you pass on all 3 piles and just take the random card over the 3rd pile, that's among the more fun things for me drafting Winston.
Yeah, how often do you go for that random card?
I have mostly done this using my old Pauper Cube, and I generally stop at any strong 2-for-1 or, you know, like the fireballs and the common power level outliers. Mm-hmm. And then later, I'm looking for on-color stuff or like bounce lands to make more things on color. Also just because bounce lands are like broken anyway. When people can't destroy them, that is.
Yes.
And honestly, just the absolute pinnacle of Winston Draft for me doing the Pauper Cube was passing on all 3 piles and then just ripping Mold Rifter off the top. That's just like the most invincible feeling.
I have... So I've drafted this a lot with my 540 card powered cube, and the amount of times that someone has ripped a piece of power randomly off the top is just an outrageous amount.
And I imagine in powered cube you're supposed to be way more discriminate. Like you're probably taking a lot more randoms, just hoping for power or anything of that nature.
Oh, if the face down cards are all like 1s and 2s stacks, I'm like already have my mind on that random. Unless I'm like getting a choice card in those in those 3 stacks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fun. So this is a format that is often attracted to people because it's really even though it took me the longest to explain this, it's actually one of the simplest draft formats.
Once you get going, it goes real quick.
Yeah. Once you just shuffle them up 3 down and then you start going, it goes very, very fast. Because realistically, like as soon as you're done with a stack, like as soon as you pick something, your opponent can immediately just start picking up, and you don't have to have this like once you understand how to do the format, like after you've done it a couple of times, you don't have to have this like back and forth, and it can largely happen with like minimal talking, and this draft can be done like super duper fast.
Mm-hmm.
It goes very, very fast.
Yeah, well, once you're moving into the 2nd and 3rd pile, we end up in a non-zero number of situations where you have to slap each other's hands off of the piles. Like,
yes,
I'm still drafting.
I'm still looking. Yes, that definitely happens. Yeah, sometimes you can go too fast. So on the opposite of Solomon Draft, I think this is probably the best in between rounds format because it goes quite fast and you can put a variable amount of brain power into it, pretty close to like as none as far as drafting goes.
If you really want, you could just take the random card and maybe otherwise determine a size of a pile where you will no longer pass it. Like,
yes,
I'm going for the random card unless a stack has 5 cards or something like that.
Yep. So that is a very, very real strategy. In fact, a strategy that I will often utilize to teach people of being overly picky.
Mm-hmm.
That's the strategy I called smoke them out. I will simply identify what the biggest pile is and just take it every time. You might have picked some really particular cards, but at the end of the draft, if I have like 55 cards and you have 35 cards, it becomes quite a difference.
Yeah, if we're in a situation where maybe your top the pinnacle of the cards you drafted, maybe I have a couple cards that are more powerful, but if my last 3 cards are cards I have to talk myself into playing, and you just got a bunch of just workhorses, mm-hmm. I'm gonna get worked.
Yeah, generally. So yeah, this is a legitimate strategy for this format. Not because of like you're like trying to do this, but you have to be more on the side of like you need to be aware of your pickiness when you're saying I want to go on to a next pile. Like, what are you leaving? Because you got to think if you look at a pile of 4 and you're like, I don't want any of these. All that has to happen for that pile to get taken is the card that you put down as the 5th card just has to be better than those 4 cards. And if those 4 cards didn't get taken, the chances of that start going up for every card thereafter. Or maybe you start putting 2 cards together that can formulate into a different strategy on their own, or a different color combination, or a land, or what have you. And you really start giving your opponent an advantage because you are hunting for something. And sometimes it just never comes.
Yeah, and also if you're just thinking about taking the random card beyond the 3 piles, you're leaving behind, when you pass on a pile of 4 cards, your opponent's going to get a look at those 4 cards plus a random.
Yep.
So you don't get to take the 4 in a random, but you have to think about what you're sending the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. Artifacts here are high picks for obvious reasons. They're generally better just because you're going to have less agency over lands as opposed to something like a grid draft that we were talking about earlier. And you really, when drafting, you want to make sure that the cards that you are picking the packs for are cards that are going to make your decks. Because one of the worst things you can do is realize that you have drafted cards and you can put them in your decks, but you are playing 13 basic lands and a 3.5 color deck.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very realistic thing that can happen.
Sometimes you end up stuck in a situation where you have to register the devil's mana base, as we call it. Just 6 of 3 different basics and just really hoping it somehow works out.
Yeah. For this reason, City of Brass and Friends are probably some of the best cards in the entire format. Just because you're going to be they're going to be splash colors.
Mm-hmm.
It is possible to draft a 2-color deck where you literally have only cards of 2 different colors, but it does not happen often. And you should not plan on it.
Right.
So, yeah, smoking people out is it's a good strategy, a strategy that works.
So, I was going to ask, it sounds like your general strategy runs counter to this, but I was going to ask if off the top of your head you knew the most cards you ever got in one pile. 8? Okay.
Yeah.
8 is when it gets like really difficult to talk yourself into passing it.
I didn't look at it.
There's no way I'm passing this. Yeah.
I was like, I don't care what's in here. This is too many cards, and you should not have let me have this. And then they were like, well, you tried to let me have 6, and I was like, that's true. But you let me have 8. That's a big difference. 6 is a huge number. Yeah, 8. It was like, and the cards were not good.
But there were 8 of them.
But there were 8 of them. That is the most, is 8. I've thought about that as we were talking about this segment.
Nice.
Okay, so going in between this and the next, this brings up a question that is more about kind of the overarching concept of a 2-player draft. The way that I do choosing who goes first is we will roll a die or randomly choose, however you do that. Roll a die, and the winner of the roll can either choose whether they are going to go first in the draft or whether they're going to go first in the games being played.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we used to do the same thing.
Okay, yeah. So if you and I roll, if we say even or odd and I win, I can choose. Basically, at that point, you're only choosing draft or play. Doesn't mean you have to choose to go first in the draft or choose to go first in when you're playing the game, but you will get that choice when it comes to that portion of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So you can choose to go second. If I win the roll, I'll say I'll pick draft, and then I want to go second in draft. And then when it gets to the game, Ryan will be able to say, in the game, I want to go first or I want to go second. So I think that's generally the best way to do pretty much all of these, like across the board.
Hmm. Yeah, anything that involves taking turns drafting from the same packs, definitely. This is probably different. Specifically, you mentioned doing this at a vintage cube. In Pauper Cube, I chose to draft first every time, and I really hoped my opponent chose to play first, because there was no way they were doing anything aggressive enough to punish me for taking that extra card.
Yep. I mean, really, even in vintage cubes, in this draft format, specifically in Winston, I think that is more than often the case is to choose to be on the draw.
Mm-hmm.
You get punished every once in a while, but I think the card helps you more than it hurts you over like 100 drafts.
You're more likely concerned about losing to some combo that wins that turn, and the extra card might draw your Force of Will or your Spell Pierce or whatever.
Yeah, or more likely prevent them from getting a card that gets them towards that.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think choosing to draw is often correct. Doesn't mean it's correct 100% of the time, but that's That's the same with most limited. So not choosing to draw most limited, but it varies depending on the context.
Yeah, so it used to be, there was a stretch of time where you would just take the draw and seal deck. It was just like what you were supposed to do. And you would get some free wins in PTQs because not everybody was in on the joke. Not everybody even got in the joke when you explained it to them by taking the draw and beating them. They would just take the play again and lose the match.
Yep. That happened for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Like a long, long time. I've had people basically tell me I was an idiot for choosing to draw. Or like I say I'm going to draw and then they say, okay. And then we sit there and look at each other for a minute. And I'm like, it's your turn. And they were like, what?
They can't comprehend that you would do that. Yeah.
And it's like, but I won the last game. Yes, I know. And you are going to go first. I've chosen that you get to go first. Or but you get to go first. I was like, no, I get to choose, and I'm choosing that you can go first. Yeah, it is a concept that people in limited sometimes forget. I really pined for that era, to be honest.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing you're fighting uphill. I mean, it's only so often the case that being on the draw could be correct, and there's so many examples in Magic where being on the play is better. And honestly, like, you're not going to be wrong too often, especially with modern Magic. Just take the play, whatever. There's just really funny things that, at least they come off very funny to me. The example that always comes to mind is when Tom Ross was showing up to standard or modern opens with smallpox, and he would choose to take the draw because it's like, well, if you have more opportunities to play a creature and I have one more card in my hand and I cast a smallpox, that's just all the more backbreaking. And then the opponent would get bodied and then just choose to play again, and the same thing would happen.
Yep. I played. So there was a time where Tom was in Roanoke, and his girlfriend at the time, and she was playing Smallpox as well, and I'm playing her, and we're playing in like a PPTQ or some small event, right? And we're just shuffling up, and she just asked me, she's like, "Do you want to go first?" And I was like, Tom has taught you well, but no, we'll roll because now I know what you're playing.
Yeah, you almost want to lose the die roll because if your opponent knows what's up, they'll, like, if they win the roll, they'll just take the play.
Yeah.
Like asking the do you want to go first, it's like, well,
no,
unless you're like deeper in the game, unless you're deeper in the game and you're just not playing Smallpox.
Yeah. If you could really be getting me right now. I lost the roll and then I went first. Is the end of that story.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on Winston Draft before we go to the next one?
I mean, similar to a number of these 2-player draft formats, I hope you like soup.
Yeah, this is a big soup one.
Yeah, do something mid-rangey, make sure you can cast your spells, try to generate value, stay the hell away from Goblin Piker.
Yes. Or anything smaller than that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next one. This was probably the second 2-person format I did. This is Winchester Draft. Now, I don't know where Winston and Winchester came from, but this is what they're called, Winchester Draft. So you can do this with doing 2 sets of 45 cards, or honestly, you can just do 1 stack of 90. Like, it honestly doesn't matter. The only difference is, do you want one person refilling the stacks, or do you want 2 people refilling the stacks? So what this is you set out, you have a stack of 90 or 2 stacks of 45. And then you set 1 face-up card in 1 of 4 spots. Imagine it as a square, and you're filling each of the corners of the square. And similar to Winston Draft, one person is going to go first, and they're going to pick a pile. Now, at the beginning of the draft, that's going to be 1 single card. After they pick that pile, every pile gets a card added to it. So that means you're going to have a pile that has one card, which was the pile that was drafted, and every other pile is going to have two. And then another the next person will go, and they will pick a pile, either going to be one card or two cards, and then you're going to add one card to all of the piles. And this will continue on until all of the cards are drafted out of the 90 cards. Now, we were talking about the strategy to smoke them out in Winston Draft. This is another one where you can do that, although it happens less because everything is face up and all of the information is known. Still can happen, but it doesn't happen as frequently as it does in Winston Draft. How do you feel about this format, Ryan?
My experience with this one is very minimal. I'll just loudly declare some subtext. If I truly loved any of these formats, I would not have invented my own way to draft with two players.
That's fair.
So, I mean, that probably was obvious, but it doesn't hurt to just spell it out loud. Yeah. This is reasonable. This is like leveling up Winston Draft almost. Mm-hmm. Like you introduce Winston, and then this increases the complexity, and there's some cool stuff going on, a little bit more public information, and it's reasonably fun.
Yeah, this is one that I think is another very simple one. Winston, Winchester are two that this one also goes quite fast because the cards are getting added at a clip of like 4 at a time. So, you're really firing through the draft quite quickly, and soup, like we were talking about in Winston, is often the case here too. And I think a lot of the same drafting strategies for Winchester apply as they would in a Winston draft. So the analogy for these two is probably the closest of any of the type of drafts that we're talking about, in my opinion.
And it's an interesting adaptation because it kind of turns 3 knobs you wouldn't expect to see turned at the same time. It's going to increase power level, coherency, and also chaos.
Yes.
Because you're drafting you'll get more looks at piles that make sense to draft with what you're drafting, just because you have all these face-up piles that are all growing. But then also, it is really chaotic to have 4 new face-up cards enter the draft every round.
Yes, definitely. Oh, also, I'm thinking, I'm like, well, how does it work out? 92 cards is what I would always do with this. That way, it's even rather than 90, because that would leave 2 at the end. Yeah, but it's exactly what you said. It's definitely, it can be more controlled, but it can also be more chaotic. It's very easy to let kind of a pile grow because it's not something, because you can see everything all at one time. It's easier to kind of build a more cohesive deck, but then if you're both doing that, then this pile goes like 2 cards, 3 cards, 4 cards, 5 cards, 6 cards, and you're like, okay.
It's gotta stop somewhere.
You gotta start thinking about, yeah. I'm a person of limits, and at some point I will simply just take this pile. But then every time that you do that, with the Winchester draft, you have a chance to get punished severely because 4 more cards are going to come off the top, and one of those piles will have at least 3 cards. There's no way around that. If you get to a pile that has 6, one of the piles is at least going to have 3. It's not possible for it not to because there's only 2 drafters, and if you were alternating, the minimum a pile could have, if someone basically drafted alternating between 2 piles and you let 2 piles grow, after initially picking the 3rd pile, I know I'm just saying pile a bunch. Either way, if you take that, you are still letting there be potentially a 2-card pile, a 3-card pile, and maybe a 4-card pile.
Something to keep in mind is whether this is how you think about the cards you're drafting or the cards your opponent is drafting, even if it's the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever card in the pile that is the reason it gets drafted, it still comes with those other cards. Mm-hmm. And some of them are going to show up in the games.
Inevitably, yeah. Yeah. It's easier to do the smoke them out strategy in this because cards get added to the piles quicker, but it is slightly riskier because more cards are going to get added, which is the reason that pile got so big in the first place. But you have to determine where is the point where I believe that I'm going to get the most use out of this massive pile, even at the cost of maybe a playable that we are fighting over. And that's when it gets quite interesting, is when you're both drafting 3 colors, but you both have identified red as your third color.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, okay, if I see Incinerate come up, I want to get Incinerate, which is, just a generically good card. And cards like that are generally pretty desirable once you have the fixing. Kind of going back to these other drafts, lands, obviously pretty high draft picks, for the exact reason of inevitably there's going to be these stacks that are huge, and the more of those cards you can scoop up and play, the better off you're going to be.
Yep. And even if it's not the circumstance where the large stack gives you a bunch of main deckable cards, if you just have more cards available, you're going to be playing best of 3. There's going to be something that makes you just tighter for the matchup in the sideboarding, even if it isn't like a haymaker in the matchup. You can at least maneuver in a way so you're better prepared for what your opponent's doing.
Definitely. Absolutely. Do you like to do best of 3? I assume so, because you said best of 3. I like to do best of 5 sometimes.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. And this is actually something I really like about the 180 card cube, is setup time is cut dramatically.
Yeah. Just
from a baseline of shuffling 180 cards versus 540 cards or whatever other amount of cards you want to shuffle. Sometimes what we tend to do when we do 2-player drafts with larger cubes is like, okay, we drafted this chunk of the cube, let's draft this other chunk of the cube. Mm-hmm. And even that, that's a little deflating, because some cards that you generally are excited to draft aren't going to show up.
Exactly. Yeah, that's actually something that I am a big proponent of, is in most cases not setting the cards aside, because then it's just like you're playing this sub game of who remembers what's not going to appear or what is going to appear.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's if you have 2 people that are super interested in doing that, then I think that's fine. And if you have one person that's interested in doing that, and then one person that just does not care, and once that draft is done, they're putting that out of their mind, they're just going to be at a disadvantage. And I think it's a disadvantage that's not meaningful to the gameplay. It's just this extra thing that if you remember, you get a bonus. And I'm not super into that.
Same. And then to go back and to actually answer the question that you asked, I like doing best of 3, but I like doing a bunch of drafts. So anything that cuts down on the time it takes to set up and draft again is something I'm in favor of, because I like to get as many matches in as possible.
Yeah. Understood. Totally makes sense. This is a best of 5 is one that I started doing for specifically in between rounds, because you can generally do a draft and then a best of 5. You can't always do a draft, a best of 3, then a draft and a best of 3 in the same. So yeah, kind of just depends. And
yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, that's Winchester Draft. Any other thoughts on that before we move on to our last segment?
I guess I'll add it to your best of 5. If you're playing for someone picking up the tab, if there's some stakes, then best of 5 is more engaging.
Oh yeah, big time. Especially if you got an audience.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm about that. All right. So we are going to take our last break, come back, and finish out these last 2 draft formats.
Listen up, gamers. Taking a break from the pod to let you know how you can qualify for the Strixhaven Championship. That's right, the SEG Tour Online is back, and we're giving away cash prizes, tens of thousands of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena Weekend Qualifier invitations, and Strixhaven Championship invitations. Go to segtouronline.starcitygames.com for event information. The road to the Strixhaven Championship begins here with the SEG Tour Online.
All right, 2 more draft formats, and this next one, this is one that this is the newest one to. Well, that's actually not true. Minneapolis Draft is the newest one to me.
Got him.
This is the second newest one, and this is a draft that I was calling Swap Draft because I didn't have a name for it. This was taught to me by Ryan Sachs, who is a fellow writer at Star City Games, writes about Limited very frequently. So the draft name that he has called it is, ironically, is actually named after the person that made it. So this is the Hausman Draft, named after Miles Hausman. So I would say that because this is named after a person that, you know, a groundswell of support for the Overturf draft naming convention might begin. But, you know,
it sounds like I'm looking to Ryan Sachs to start calling Minneapolis Draft Overturf Draft.
Maybe so. So this is the Hausman Draft. And this is, I'd never heard of anything like, I'd never heard of anything like this when it was explained to me. So for this draft, you take 3 stacks of cards, 2 that are 45 cards, and you give those to the 2 players, and 1 that is 81 cards. Now this is 171 cards total. So if you want to count on 171 cards and deal them out to appropriate stacks. So you have 1 in the middle that's 81 cards, 2 that are 45 cards, 1 for each player.
Okay, based on these numbers, you do have my attention for my 180 card cube. So
yes,
I'm intrigued already.
Yeah. And you could actually you could probably slightly adjust everything if you want to get this to 180, but we're at 171 right now. So what you do is you take a set of 9 from the middle stack of 81 and you put it into a grid. Now, the orientation of this does not generally matter because it is not the size or the shape of where the cards are, but just that you have 9 cards on the table. Then each player draws 5 cards from their stack of 45, the top 5. And then they alternate by taking a card that's in the stack of 9, putting it in their hand of 5, and then placing a card from their hand back down into the stack. And you do this each 3 times. So I will take a card out of my, so I have 5 cards in my hand. I'm going to grab one of the 9, put it in my hand, and then take one of the 6 and put it back down. Then I'm going to pass it to Ryan. He's going to do the same thing, and then we'll each do that 2 more times. So you have 3 swaps each, and then you take those 9 cards and you set them aside. Those are no longer a part of the draft. And then you do this 8 more times. So you do this process 9 times. So 9 times 5 is 45, which for each of the stacks, 9 times 9 in the middle is 81.
Okay. So this sounds like this is a draft format very much trying to push for more coherent decks. It's trying to move you in the direction of doing something more purposeful than just generating card advantage and being able to cast your spells.
Yes. This is the format that is, of probably all of these, is going to get you the closest analog to whatever a draft deck in your cube looks like. You have a lot of agency. This is kind of a mix between sealed and draft. So you're going to start with 45 cards, and you're going to ultimately be able to swap out 27 of those cards, so full half of those. Over half, you can swap out. So you have a significant amount of agency, but there's also this obvious game that you have of, well, once I notice what my opponent is taking, what do I want to give them if I am not playing a strategy? Because the decks are so much more focused, there's less of the soup, and you actually start to say, well, this is a draft archetype that I'm focusing on, and there's a card that I have in my initial stack that I might not want, but do I want to swap this card? And it really depends, because you could open on 5 cards and you're like, I really want like 4 of these. But you're still going to have to be doing some sort of swapping. So you could put a card down that you want to pick back up, like with the first one. Like you have your of the 4 cards you want out of the 5 you have, the 4th one you're like, I'm going to put this 4th best card down and grab a card. And then you know with your second one you're going to do the card you don't want. or however you want to do that. And you might be able to pick that card back up, but you ultimately still have to be putting cards down out of your hand, and you want to make sure that you're not feeding your opponent to the strategy they are trying to do with that, because the card you might not want might be a highly desirable card for them because the decks are going to be so much more focused.
Mm-hmm. I do like that the texture of how you want to approach your swaps and figure out what you're doing changes dramatically based off of how coherent the first, and I guess the first few 5-card packs you pick up are.
Yep.
Like, is this putting me in a direction, or do I have to really carve something out from here?
Yeah, and generally, you, unlike a lot of these other draft formats, you actually want to, at some point, say, okay, I need to try to refine what I'm doing. Because if you're not, and you're trying to do the soup, your opponent will be able to refine. Now, you could both choose soup, of course, but there's a lot more agency you have here. So if you are choosing soup and you're just trying to play all the best cards and play all lands, well, there's a good chance you might be drafting a deck that looks like you drafted it in a grid draft, and your opponent might be drafting a deck that looks like they drafted it in an 8-man draft. And generally, the 8-man draft deck is going to beat the grid draft soup deck. Not always, but that's something you have to be keenly aware of.
Right. There's a good mix of hidden and public information here, and I think my favorite part of the drafting here is keeping an eye on the cards your opponent puts into the draftable pile from their concealed hand. I think that's where you're going to glean the most meaningful information from, and that's a really cool element of this one. They're taking something that is in their pool and reintroducing it, giving it up.
Yeah. So the only thing that is a downside to this draft is this is a very memory-based draft, because if you have someone that has like an exceptional memory, they're going to be at a pretty significant advantage, even beyond all of these other draft formats that we've talked about. That's obviously the case with limited in general when you're passing cards back and forth, but this is really one where if you can track stuff along the entire draft, you're going to be at a big head start over your opponent.
Yeah, you see a number of their picks, and you also see a lot of the cube that you know that they won't be able to cast.
Exactly. Yeah, because you're at the end you're removing those 9 cards. Now, you could have a rule where you could say you're allowed to go look at the leavings, like after you remove them. I don't like to do that. But that's kind of the thing. Same with grid drafting. Like, I don't like looking at the cards that you're setting aside that no one is getting. Once those are gone, they're gone.
It's too much bookkeeping.
Yeah.
It technically, yeah, this is public information. You should know it, but are we playing for fun, or are we playing because we really, really need to win?
Yeah. And it's more from a time perspective, because if you're like, well, hold on, before I take my pick, let me review the previous 7 packs. Let me look at these, these 63 cards that we've gone through. And it's like, no, we're not gonna do that. Just pick your card, swap it out. Let's keep it moving.
Yeah. I imagine just teasing my friends mercilessly if they want to review the pile.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you never won a 2-player draft before, huh?
Yeah.
You really need this one.
Yeah, it really means a lot to you.
Really need this one.
Okay, yeah, take all the time you need. It's fine.
I got nowhere to be. It's cool.
Yeah. I think that's a good strategy for making sure people are ashamed the appropriate amount if they feel like they need to do that. There's a lot of that in 2-person draft because, look, inevitably, there's going to be shit talking. You might not be a shit talker, but a 2-person draft really has a way of bringing it out of you.
Everything's personal in a 2-player draft.
Exactly.
There's no way around
everything. Yeah, there's no way around it. Everything they're doing to you. It's not some faceless opponent. Your misery is their gain 100% of the time.
You might be the nicest person in the world. It's going to come up eventually where a card that you wanted didn't come back, and just going to slip out. I can't believe you took that.
Yeah.
I can't believe you took that from me.
Yes. Yeah, it's not I can't believe this is in the pack. I can't believe you left this in the pack. Because that's all that means. There's only one other person you could be saying these things to. So For the Who's Been Draft, I've done this the least out of the formats I've drafted, because I found out about this. There's about a 5-month period from the time that I learned of this draft format to the time where I could not interact with human beings face to face.
Yeah.
So I quickly learned that this is from a strategy standpoint, this is the most straightforward of trying to draft things that you would be drafting in a normal cube. And I think a lot of those type strategies carry over here more often than they carry over in a lot of these other drafts. Yeah,
I totally buy that just based on the numbers. There's clearly some variance in the cards you're starting with, but it is certainly moving you in the right direction. I haven't tried it. I'm willing to try it. It sounds pretty cool. It's interesting. There's some stuff that I certainly wouldn't have thought of, which is usually what I like an idea. When somebody presents an idea and it's like, I never would have thought of that's usually the kind of idea I'm most interested in trying, as opposed to things that are similar than my ideas, where it's just like, well, I'm doing it this way. That's different for a reason. But this is very intriguing to me.
Yeah, that's how I was pulled into this. Like, that came up and I was like, I have legitimately never heard of this before. So I'm immediately interested. I've drafted like all of these other 2-player formats and probably some others that I'm not thinking of. And obviously, this should go without saying to our audience, but this is not the extent of all of the 2-player draft formats. There are going to be some that you wish we had said that we did not. Keep in mind, we're not trying to make this podcast last 100 hours. And ultimately, you wouldn't like if we did, because you only care about the one that we didn't say, and you wouldn't care about the 8 that we would, because that's 8 other people that also care about just the 1 and not the 8. So, in the comments on Twitter, however you can get in touch with us, let us know what your favorite 2-person draft format is, because I want to hear about it, especially if it's one that we didn't cover on the show today.
Yeah, and that's something that's also really worth hammering home, saying explicitly, is these are some examples. There's more ways to do it. Maybe some ways that you have done previously, maybe something that both you and we have never heard of. And really optimizing the cube experience is just about finding the way that people are doing it, or even coming up with your own way that you enjoy the most.
Yeah.
You hear the ideas, you take what you like, refine your own experience. Cube is all about making it your own. It's all about your personal enjoyment, because like, what the hell are you playing for otherwise?
Yeah. Yeah, take these draft suggestions, tweak them, tweak the numbers, tweak how you manipulate the cards. Do it. That's what it's all about. That's where most of these came from. Like a lot of these they're derived from other ideas and then iterated on. So okay. So we have one more. And this is a format that I came up with. Now, much like we were talking about things that have been iterated on from other ideas, this is kind of a few different types of formats that are shoved together. And this is not a draft format. It is a 2-player format, but it is not a draft format.
So it would not be correct to call it Parnell Draft?
It would not.
Okay.
So this is called the Iron Cube. And this is the only thing I've ever called it. And I have a story of how this came about. So when many years ago, not long after I had made my cube, so probably somewhere between 10 and 12 years ago, because I was still living in Greensboro, North Carolina, I had a few friends over, and being the early 20s people that we were not so focused on the weather. So as it turns out, there was a massive blizzard to the point where the city was entirely shut down. We got like 13 inches of snow. In North Carolina, that is about 12 inches more than you need to shut a city down.
I could tell a brief snow in that part of the country story, if that's appropriate, if you wouldn't mind.
Have at it.
So at SCG Con, the one that got snowed out.
Yep.
So I live in Minnesota. Minnesota's been home my whole life. And I remember waking up that morning. I'm not a morning person. It takes me a couple cups of coffee to really engage with reality on any kind of meaningful level. first thing I always do when I wake up is, brush my teeth and shower. So get out of bed in the morning in my hotel, look out the window. It's lightly snowing. And this is just normal for me. I think, yeah, that's probably fine. I hop in the shower, get out of the shower, I'm drinking some horrible hotel room Keurig coffee, and just looking out the window, realize where I am. Wait a minute, I'm in Roanoke, Virginia. I better call Chris. This is probably not actually fine.
As it turns out,
that light snow turned into a few inches, turned into nobody could drive anywhere.
Yeah. To be fair, to be entirely fair,
I mean, it's an infrastructure thing. That's all it is.
It was 16 inches of snow, and this is in like early December. So that is a lot of snow, and it's just that we were not prepared.
Yeah, there's no salt on the road.
Yeah.
There's not plows running around.
Yeah. Like, it was fine, like, within, 36 hours.
Yeah,
but it was not fine that morning at all.
We ended up going to Cookout later that day, and there was the most miserable employees I'd ever seen in my life, who presumably they, couldn't leave. Like, they got there, foolishly showed up to work, and, couldn't get out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a story. I was ultimately, there were not many people at the convention center that day. I was there because that was the day that we were doing the top 8 cube draft. Mm-hmm. So I was going to be there. I was going to be there regardless to watch in person. But not only that, but my best friend Ali Antrazi was in that top 8. So we had to go to the convention center regardless. Like, we didn't have a choice. Or lest he, not be a part of a $10,000 draft. So
bad one to miss.
Yeah. So fortunately, I'm even though I'm from North Carolina, I feel comfortable enough in my driving, so we were able to make it up there, and that's quite the day. It was a very interesting day. Anyway, yes. So the Iron Cube. We'll call this, we'll say like 2010. 2010, I think, is probably realistically around the time where this has happened. So I have 3 of my friends at my house, and we get entirely snowed in, which is, doesn't take a lot for North Carolina, but we had a decent amount of snow. And this lasted for like 3 days, because even more so than Roanoke, Virginia, which is actually in the mountains, Greensboro, North Carolina is not at all. So I have my cube, and we're doing these 4-man drafts, and at some point, we're just like, one of my friends, it was actually John May, who I don't think is a retired Magic player, was quite good a decade ago. Anyway, we are like, why don't we just draft the whole cube? And then I was like, well, what if we don't draft? What if we just play through the whole cube? So what we ultimately did was we created this format, which is the Iron Cube. You take the cube, all 540 cards, and you essentially grab a stack, and you make sure that your deck is 40 cards. And you simply play Magic until the cube is done. When a game ends, you set aside every single card that you had in your hand, that you had on the battlefield, that you had in your graveyard, and that you saw in your library, be at the top or the bottom of your library. You set all of those cards aside, and then that person gets 1 point. And you play through the entire cube until the cube is done. Usually for a 540 card cube, it's between 16 and 19 games. So, since you have no basic lands in the cube, when you have cards in your hand, you can play a card face down, and that card is a non-basic land with every basic land type. So you can play whatever cards you want, and the other caveat is you're not allowed to search your library. So generally, cards you're putting face down are Demonic Tutors and Scalding Tarns, and most lands, but of course you can also play a land as a land. So if you have a Raging Ravine, you can play the Raging Ravine as a Raging Ravine as your land. You still can just play one land turn. But ultimately, you go through the entirety of the cube and you just play a game. And when that game is done, those cards are removed and you don't get them back. You refill your deck to 40 from the bottom up. It doesn't really matter because anything you see you get taken out. And then you play until the entire cube is done. And that is the Iron Cube.
So it's like
it is a marathon cubing of two people.
It's like a battle box adjacent, like you said, cube marathon.
Yeah. So this plays. This is like specifically was created because I had a 540 card cube. The smaller it is, the less enticing this gets because you're not getting that many games out of it.
Mm-hmm.
The quicker the games go, the more games you're going to have because you're using less cards. Because you're literally just playing until you have run out, until you cannot refill your deck to 40 cards. And that is the Iron Cube.
How many Iron Cubes have you run? How many have you played?
Many. In the somewhere between 20 and 30 probably.
Nice.
That was the last two-person cube that I did.
So it's not just a Blizzard experience. This is one you
did this
actually will plan to do.
Did this on a Sunday, yeah.
Nice. It's like a full day thing, I imagine. That's a lot of games.
Yeah, you're looking at like the time it would take you to do a full 8-man draft. Realistically.
Nice.
So, if that's the kind of time you want to do, and ultimately it was myself and John Che, who used to be the director and producer of Commander Versus, who's my producer for my other podcast, Think Twice. So he had his cube, and we were gonna try to put a cube together when I was visiting Charlotte, which is where he and Ollie Antrazi live. And he was just like, "You want an Iron Cube?" And I was like, "Yep." So we just did it for like 3.5 hours. I lost, which is like the first time he's beat me in that. So, and I've been waiting now, like it's going to be like 1.5 years before I can get him back. Because this was the very last weekend, like before COVID happened, and then everything shut down.
Building up to the grudge match all this time.
Yeah, so it's gonna be quite the grudge match when we can finally throw down again two-man cube. So yeah, that was the one that we did because we were like, we got a lot of, instead of just doing a bunch of drafts back to back, we'll just, you can pull it out, you can just shuffle it up, put it down and play, and you can just fire through it. It gives you the most Magic playing for your buck. It's not drafting, and that's obviously what we've been talking about today, and something that is very desirable for people that play Cube. But if you just want to play Magic and just go through as many games of Magic as you can, and you have a Cube, this is a great thing to do.
This seems like a dispute settling format.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you want it that way? You have to beat me in the Iron Cube.
Yeah, and it's oh man, it's crazy because like it's possible. And the last time, I got my head beat in. It was like I think it was like 12 to 6.
Oh,
and it just started. And I think I won like the last two. So it was like you can't concede. Even though there will be a point where you're like, I can't come back, you have to see it through because you got to see that final score and see how badly you get your head beat in. And it's tricky because like this is definitely a, do you want to be on the play? Do you want to be on the draw? Drawing is mostly good, but because of the way that the lands work, you can just draw an aggressive start and you can just get someone. So there's a lot of tension in deciding whether you want to play, whether you want to draw, how many cards you want to draw, because if you draw cards and you don't use them, they're just going to be gone. You're never going to get to use them again. Like Top and like Library are really interesting cards because you can, if you look at those cards but you don't use them, if you've looked at them, you have to remove them. Because nothing that you have seen at all can be used again. It's all gone. So there's a lot of little, like, very little interesting things. The card, like, there was a time, that very first time, like, Wild Cattle was in my cube. This, like, over a decade ago. And that was in that very first instance of the Iron Cube. And that was one of the first things that someone like that someone played that John played against me, and I was like, that's the rule. That's the rule that we said, so that's going to be awfully good.
Yeah.
He did later die to Dark Confidant, revealing who, what, when, where, why, which is 13. And that's because you don't exactly know what you're going to get.
Oh, no. So
this has made for a lot of really great stories, which is, again, as I've talked about, like one of my favorite things about Cube. So this is a format that I've played a lot and is near and dear to my heart. This is the one that I've kind of come up with. So
that seems like a really nice make a day of it way to Cube. I love that. I also do love conceding, however. I think that people aren't appreciative enough of the fact that Magic allows us to concede. Mm-hmm. And these are some things you might not be aware of. There are other games that have really draconian, at least tournament policy regarding conceding.
Yeah.
It's just like not allowed in some organized play. So some Magic players don't appreciate that conceding is a privilege. And I try to spread that word far and wide. I think that conceding is one of the best things you can do for your mental health sometimes.
In the Iron Cube, you can absolutely concede, but you cannot mulligan.
Oh, I love that.
No mulls. You can concede instantly, but you can't mulligan.
I'm a big fan of have to keep.
Yeah.
They're declaring have to keep at the start of a game.
You're keeping it.
A friend of mine has been collecting all of the gold border, like World Championship top 8 decks that they printed however many years ago. And he got his hands on the ones from like 94, back when the mulligan rule was if you have a land.
Yeah. Or
if you have fewer than 7 lands, you have to keep.
Yeah, you could mulligan with 0, 1, or 7.
It's not an always thing, but now and again I do enjoy the old have to keep format.
Have to keep, yeah. Cards that are great in this, the aforementioned bounce lands, quite good. You can hide something down there where it can't get plucked out of your hand or something otherwise bad happened to it, then play a bounce land, pick it back up. Similarly, Moloku is often a bomb.
Jeez.
Yeah. But then you have like other cards, like I said, Demonic Tutor has no text on it. So that one's often a land.
Takes a dip.
Yeah. So I think that's what we got today. We went over 7 different formats. I love doing 2-man cubes. I just want to get back to cubing. It's really the thing that this episode has really reminded me.
Definitely. And I did a couple 8-player cubes yesterday, and again, going to bat for quitting things. But we just did a draft where I played a couple matches, and Pro Tour champion Greg Orange is taking his goddamn sweet time like he always does. Yeah. He was just deep in a control mirror, and so I just challenged one of my friends to a 2-player draft instead of continuing with waiting for that.
Man. Yeah. You can't let those people, they think they can just take all the time in the world.
Hey, he's not wrong. We weren't going anywhere. I just, I wasn't going to take my turn.
Yeah, sure. Oh, man. All right. If you want to subscribe to the 540, you can do so wherever you're listening, and other places like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Stitcher, YouTube, and of course, if you have a local podcast app, maybe you're listening to it on a bunch of different places. Maybe you're just like, I love this show so much, I need to download it on 7 different applications, and I would say, that's great. Please just continue to do that. You don't have to listen to it 7 times, but you can download it. It doesn't hurt. Just click it. Just click that button. What are you going to worry about your data at home? No one thinks about that.
Mm-mm.
Just go to your computer at home and just click, download a bunch of times.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere that you can, leave us a review, whether it be stars or words. We like both. Sometimes at the same time, but, any of those things that can help the algorithm and let people know about the show is always very helpful. It's also nice if you go on Twitter and you're like, this is the greatest podcast I've ever listened to. Not that we're telling you to say that, but that's something you could say just as a helpful hint. You do whatever you want. But anytime you talk about the 540, wherever you are, it always helps. And if you want to tag us, like you could tag me at jparnell1 on Twitter to do that, I would retweet it. I would say, that's a very nice thing that you said without anyone requesting you say so.
I'd toss you a like.
Yeah, I'd toss you a like. I'd toss you a retweet. Maybe even a quoted retweet. I don't want to get crazy. I don't want to promise that. If you want to find my other podcasts, you can search Think Twice MTG on any audio platform, including this one that you're listening to right now. And of course, you can find me on Commander Versus, on Star City Games, and YouTube, and on twitch.tv/jparnell. Ryan, where can people find your stuff?
You can find my tweets at Ryan Overdrive. You can find my articles on StarCityGames.com. A lot of digital cubes have been rolled out again. Last week's article was about Emma Handy's Proliferate cubes. That's still up at the time of recording, but when you're listening to this, we'll be drafting Legacy Cube on Magic Online, and I'll have an article up about that. I'm expecting a lot of changes. They kind of teased that Legacy Cube and Modern Cube are going to go through kind of heavier rotations. So I'm excited to see what they change with that. Excited to get to work writing about it, drafting it. So we'll have 2 weeks of that. So yeah, find my stuff on StarCityGames.com. Any updates about my life, what I'm working on, this, that, and the other thing on my Twitter at Ryan Overdrive.
Boom. And I think we might even chat about Ryan's experience coming up on a future episode here at the 540. Who knows?
There's only one way to find out.
That's true. Let's come back next week. So thanks, everyone. We'll catch you next time.